Hello, Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt here of the Christ School of Theology. The Christ School of Theology is the graduate school of the Institute of Lutheran Theology. We're talking today about Leibniz. I talked last time about two of his principles, the principle of the best, that God must bring about the best, if you will, and the principle of the predicate being in the notion, that is in every true proposition, the predicate is included in the notion of the subject. Now that means that if I have a word, I say Aristotle, everything that ever happened to Aristotle is included, everything that can be said to be true of Aristotle is included in the notion, if you will, of Aristotle. So where Aristotle went, when he went into exile, when he left the academy and started his own lyceum, all of this is included in the notion of Aristotle. And you've got to hold on to that idea. Now we're coming to the principle of contradiction. This is not that difficult, he says. A proposition cannot be true and false at the same time, and therefore A is A and cannot be not A. Well, of course, this is true. This is where we start in any kind of logical thinking. But he believes this to be a metaphysical truth. So the primary truths of his metaphysical systems are thus identities. Okay? All truths are reducible to these primary identities by definitions. So all affirmative propositions, whether they're universal or particular, whether they're contingent or necessary, the predicate is contained implicitly or explicitly in the subject. And the principle of contradiction tells us what predicates cannot be included within subjects. Now, the principle of sufficient reason, it's just always called PSR, so if you ever see that in a philosophy book, principle of sufficient reason. Basically, this is the notion that nothing happens without a reason. And if you like your Latin, you would say to your friend, nihil est sine ratione. Okay? Nothing is without a reason. Leibniz writes, nothing is without a reason. Or, he says, there is no effect without a cause. Now, you should be all jumping up from your chairs and running around and saying, oh, these are different statements. Not for Leibniz. To say that nothing is without a reason is to say that there is no effect without a cause. Because, of course, cause and reason are thought to be the same kind of things for Leibniz. We don't think of it that way. But the great rationalist philosophers tended to equate this. We see it in Spinoza as well. A cause is a Grund. That is, why another thing happens is its cause. And a why another thing happens is an explanation, the reason why the thing happens as well, right? So at this time, if you can kind of hold on to thinking cause and reason are working in the same logical geography, if you will, this will make more sense to you. He says of the principle of sufficient reason that it, quote, must be considered one of the greatest and most fruitful of all human knowledge, for upon it is built a great part of metaphysics, physics, and moral science. The principle of sufficient reason, that nothing happens without a cause, that there is nothing that occurs that is not finally grounded upon some reason, that there are no just brute facts. So, Leibniz would not be too excited about learning that at the beginning there is a infinitely dense but unextended point from which the Big Bang flows, because of course Leibniz would want to ask, well, what is the reason for that thing, right? So he's always going to be asking, what is the reason for a thing? And of course, the only kind of thing that finally has a reason within itself is something like God. You got to think about that. Some would disagree, of course. Anyway, Leibniz holds that someone with adequate information will be able necessarily to give an account of why a thing is what it is. Someone with adequate information could do that. We don't most of the time have that. We don't have adequate information, so we might not be able to give an account. But of course, God can give an account, right? God always has all information, so God can give an account. That means to say there is an account, even though we are epistemically limited in accessing it. Now, the principle of sufficient reason follows from the predicate and notion theory. A truth with no reason would be like a subject not containing its predicate, you see. So, a truth with a reason is a predicate. The reason is the predicate that's contained within the notion. Now, this stuff, after you start thinking Leibnizian thoughts, it becomes fairly easy to think them. You've got to understand that this man believed that everything was ultimately reasonable. Right? Spinoza thought the same thing. Descartes, well, yes, but we have this little problem with matter. Then we have the mind-body problem. Certainly when we get to Hegel, there's the last man, I think, to see the universe in totally rational terms, perhaps in the West. But with Leibniz, this is just writ large. Now, I want to go to his most famous of all principles that we always associate with him. I want to start by pointing out something that most of us believe, and that is to say that identical things have the same property. So, for all x and for all y, right? If x and y are the same thing, then for any properties p, x will have p if and only if y has p. And all of you are supposed to agree with this. This is the indiscernibility of identicals. Identical things are indiscernible in all of their properties. Now, there is a converse to this that Leibniz holds, that Thomas Aquinas held. And the converse of this is this, for all x and for all y and for all p, right? See? Then, if x has p, if and only if y has p, then x and y are the same thing. Now, this is called the indiscernibility of identicals. This is called the identity of indiscernibles. For any x, for any y, and for any property p, if x has that property p, if and only if y has that property p, and I'm talking about any property, so any x and y that are indiscernible with respect to their properties are the same thing, right? Now, Leibniz's law, you have to understand, Leibniz's law, if you see that ever referred to, Leibniz's law is the conjunction of these two, okay? So Leibniz's law would state this. Now I've made the identity of indiscernibles into Leibniz's law. For all x and all y and all p, two things are indiscernible if and only if they're the same thing. So it runs both ways. We'll come back to the principle of identity of indiscernibles and other relevant things in Leibniz's thought. I'm Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology.